and inviting a special guest from Missoula, Montana to help us do that. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Black Hills Clean Water Alliance. My name is Alex Massa. I am the Northern Hills organizer for the Black Hills Clean Water Alliance. And we want you all to feel free to take in this information, ask questions toward the end of the presentation, and give a warm round of applause and warm Rapid City welcome to Bonnie Gestring of Earthworks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bonnie Gestring. I'm the Northwest Program Director at Earthworks. We are a nonprofit conservation organization, and we are dedicated to protecting communities and the environment against the adverse impacts of mineral and energy development. I work specifically on mining issues throughout the Northwest region. And I have been working on mining issues for about 2 decades now, date myself. But I got involved in this work because, as Alex mentioned, I live in Missoula, Montana. We're at the tail end of one of the largest Superfund sites in the nation. If anybody's driven through Butte, Montana, you've seen the giant open pit mine there at Berkeley Pit. Mine waste from the Berkeley Pit historically was discharged into the Clark Fork River and extended 120 miles downriver to Missoula, where it piled up behind Milltown Dam, and arsenic from the tailings behind the Milltown Dam was leaching into the city's aquifer. And I was a graduate student at the time and was interested in water quality and began studying the impacts of mining on water and aquatic life. And so I came to this work for the same reason that probably many of you are here tonight, concern for clean water, concern for the drinking water and the watershed for the place and the home where you live. I've been involved in a number of mineral withdrawals through my work, and so the Black Hills Clean Water Alliance asked if I could share some of those experiences with you as you're considering and are engaged in that process yourselves. And so I wanted to walk through those. And first slide, yeah. So a mineral withdrawal is a really powerful tool that federal agencies have to withdraw or protect a certain area of federal public lands from new mining activity in order to safeguard a public resource like a drinking watershed or cultural resources or fish and wildlife habitat or whatever that. There's a lot of leeway in terms of the specific thing that it can be protecting, but it is authorized through FLPMA, which is the Federal Land Policy Management Act. Next slide. And before we get into mineral withdrawals, I want to talk a little bit about the 1872 mining law, because that is the reason that mineral withdrawals are so necessary. The mining on our federal public lands is governed by the 1872 mining law. And hard rock mining is essentially metal mining. It's gold, silver, copper. This law was enacted 150 years ago under President Ulysses S. Grant. It was specifically intended to try and promote westward expansion. And next slide. And it still applies to mining on our federal public lands today. Next one. And it authorizes individuals and mining companies to stake mining claims, an indefinite number of mining claims, and hold those mining claims for an indefinite period of time. And it allows minerals to be extracted off of those claims with no royalties paid to the U.S. government in return for the minerals that are removed. I put this map up it's a map that the Black Hills Clean Water Alliance created to show the extent of mining claims in the Black Hills. So all those little purple checks you see there are individual claims. And Lilius was telling me this morning that there have been 33,000 acres of new mining claims staked since December. So it just illustrates the extent of mineral claims that have been staked throughout this region, and why mineral withdrawals are such an important tool. Next slide. And part of that is because the 1872 mining law prioritizes mining over all other land uses. So I think many of you have experienced this already. Our federal public land managers don't feel like they have the ability to deny a proposed mining operation in order to protect another resource, which is why mineral withdrawals are such an important component. Somehow, did you jump ahead? I had another slide in there. Can you go back one? There we go. And so I wanted to talk a little bit, a lot of people reference modern mining, and modern mining technology is certainly better than what it has been historically. And it's mining is currently done much more responsibly in the past. However, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency still identifies mining as the leading source of toxic releases in the United States. So releases of hazardous materials into land and water and air. And I completed this report that you see on the right with a colleague of mine out of Nevada. We released this report in 2017. And I looked at the track record of water quality impacts for 27 gold mining operations across the U.S., accounting for roughly 93% of U.S. gold production at the time. And we looked at two things. We looked at how many spills occurred of hazardous materials at these mines, and we also looked at whether they captured and controlled their wastewater, or whether wastewater was released into water resources. And so what we found was that 100% of the mines had spills of some sort across their history. And you can find this report on our website if you want all the details and examples. And that water quality impacts occurred to surface and groundwater at 74%. As a result of failure to capture and control wastewater. So even today, at modern mines, water quality impacts definitely continue to occur, and the EPA has, as I mentioned, identified it as the leading source of toxic releases. So it's understandable that there are concerns about water quality even today, and it's why it's important to have this tool to be able to proactively withdraw an area from mining in order to safeguard some other use, like a drinking water aquifer. So as I mentioned earlier, withdrawals are a tool that our Secretary of Interior has, and she can, in this case it's a she, so I'll say she can use her authority under FLPMA to withdraw a particular area of public land from new mining activity. And I just picked out the mineral withdrawal that was approved a few years ago just north of Yellowstone National Park. But this is the example that you're seeing there. The red outline is the area that has been withdrawn. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Next slide. So if approved, the mineral withdrawal will prevent the location of new mining claims, so no new claim staking within the area, and it limits activities such as exploration and development only to those claims with valid existing rights. So if there's a claim that pre-exists when those lands were withdrawn, then those claim holders have the authority to do exploration and development if those claims are valid and subject to all of the state and federal laws. So plan of operation would have to be approved, but those are the limitations. And a valid mining claim is one that's been subject to a formal process to determine if there's been a discovery of a valuable mineral deposit on each and every claim. So they have to demonstrate validity on every claim. If they can't, then that area becomes part of the withdrawal. So that I think is important to understand because of the number of claims that have been staked in this area, the claims that are within the mineral withdrawal area. Those that pre-existed the mineral withdrawal will have to go through a validity exam. That gets triggered if they submit a plan of operate. And so at that point, they'll have to demonstrate if they have a valid claim on every single one of those claims. And if they don't, then that becomes an invalid claim and that area becomes part of the mineral withdrawal. So important part to understand of this whole process, and it's complicated, so if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them as we get further in. But just to give you an idea of how the mineral withdrawal works, this is the process up here, and you are at the second big yellow stage. So first one is the U.S. Forest Service. In this case, it submitted a withdrawal application to the BLM because the BLM manages subsurface rights. And the BLM reviewed and gave it a thumbs up. And the Forest Service and BLM put the notice in the Federal Register and segregated the area for 2 years. So for 2 years, the area is withdrawn while they study the impacts of doing approving a 20-year mineral withdrawal. So no new claims can be staked now within this 2-year period while they're studying the potential for a mineral withdrawal. During that 2-year period, they will conduct public comment period, get your views on whether a mineral withdrawal should or shouldn't happen, and they'll do an environmental analysis of the proposed mineral withdrawal. So they'll be conducting an environmental assessment to look at the social and environmental impacts of withdrawing, protecting those lands. So it's a little different than, they're not analyzing the effects of a mine, you're analyzing the effects of protecting this area from new mining. So they'll be analyzing the social and environmental aspects of the mineral withdrawal itself, and that's what they'll be seeking in terms of public comment on the mineral withdrawal. So you're right here at the 90-day public comment period, the little green area, and then the next step will be that planning process where they'll complete a draft environmental assessment, give you an opportunity to comment on the draft environmental assessment, and we'll get into that we'll get into the details of the EA process when I do the Yellowstone example. Once the planning process is done, the BLM reviews. If they give the approval, then it will go to the Secretary of Interior, and the Secretary of Interior will finalize it by issuing a public land order, and that will be the official withdrawal of the area for the 20-year process. At the end of the 20 years, they can renew a mineral withdrawal, and they often do. So while it's well, I shouldn't say they often do, but it's not uncommon for an agency to renew a 20-year withdrawal as long as there's still strong public support and a need for it. Next slide. So a few examples of mineral withdrawals that I've been involved in recently. This one's in the Little Rocky Mountains in Montana. It was just finalized last year under the Biden administration. It withdrew 2,600 acres of land in order to protect water resources from proposed gold exploration, and also cultural resources in the Little Rockies, because the area is immediately adjacent to the Fort Belknap Reservation, and the area is on traditional lands important to the Assiniboine and Gros Ventre tribes. But the area had been very heavily impacted by past mining. The Zortman-Landusky mine, which was permitted in 1980, closed in 1998, created significant acid mine drainage that caused impacts to both surface and groundwater in the area. And the mining company filed for bankruptcy. The state of Montana and the BLM now manage the site, and there are very significant water treatment plants on the site, and roughly $50 million in public funds have been spent in reclamation of this area. And so in order to protect the reclamation and also to protect the adjacent federal lands from any new exploration because of the ongoing impacts from the old operation, the tribes and conservation community in the area asked the federal agencies to initiate this mineral withdrawal, and that was approved in 2022. Another example is the Siskiyou region in southwest Oregon, and this was approved in 2018. This would have been the Obama administration. It withdrew 100,000 acres of Forest Service land in southwest Oregon, and this one was really tied to protecting fish and wildlife habitat and the drinking water source for downstream communities. So these watersheds were important for steelhead and salmon fisheries, and there was a lot of proposed exploration in the headwaters. And so under this administration, there's a lot of support from the downstream communities whose economy is based on a recreational economy and wanted to see these headwaters protected. Also from the drinking water, also in terms of protecting the drinking water resources for the downstream communities. So one of the things that was particularly important there was the business community. There was a lot of support from the businesses in the region for that mineral withdrawal. And then this is a third example. So this mineral withdrawal was approved in 2018 under the Trump administration. Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke approved this. In this case, they withdrew 30,000 acres of federal public lands adjacent to the park on the north side. There were actually two separate areas where there were gold exploration proposed and copper exploration proposed. A lot of concern by the business community in this area about the impacts to the recreation economy. I mean, as you can understand, around Glacier National Park, a lot of people's economic well-being is tied to Yellowstone National Park, and so the business community here was a big source of support for this mineral withdrawal. And next slide. And I thought I would just give you an idea of the timeline that it took to get the mineral withdrawal through. So the Federal Register notice was posted in November of 2016. It triggered the 90-day public comment period, which is what you're all experiencing right now. In this case, they actually did scoping after the 90-day comment period, but in your case, they've combined it. They've said the 90-day comment period is going to serve as scoping, so it'll be a little bit more streamlined, but in this case, they separated it out. That occurred in June of 2017, and then it was a full, is that 8 months? 8 months later that the draft environmental assessment was issued. That's where they analyzed the potential environmental and social impacts of protecting the land. So once again, not looking at the impacts of mining, but looking at the effects of withdrawing the area from mining. So what does that mean for water quality, protecting it from mining? What does that mean for vegetation? What does it mean for wildlife? What are the social consequences of protecting those resources? So that's the type of thing that the environmental assessment will look at. And then if the environmental assessment determines, and there will be a public comment period associated with that, so that'll be an opportunity to review the draft EA, see what it says, and submit comments. And then at the end of that process, in May of 2018, they issued what's called a FONSI, which is an acronym for Finding of No Significant Impact. And so essentially what they were saying was, because we're protecting this area, there will be no significant impact to the environment and the social and environmental impact. Therefore, based on our analysis, we can take the next step and recommend the mineral withdrawal if there's support for it. So that's typically, this is the process that mineral withdrawal of this size goes through. So the 3 examples I gave you all were EAs. They range from 2,600 acres to 100,000 acres. The one that you're considering right now is around 20,000 acres. So it's within that realm that EA was done, and something that we recommend because it's a streamlined approach to get to the decision that you want to have made within the 2-year time period that you have available. So I recommend that to participants, people who are engaged in the process, because you want to get to if you're in support of the withdrawal, then you want to get to that point as quickly as possible. And so we'll get then here to the last slide, which is what do we recommend and how can you engage? And certainly from my experience in being involved in a number of these withdrawals, public engagement is really key. I mean, it's important that the federal agencies are hearing from local communities that there is support for the withdrawal. So it's important to participate in the process and submit comments to the federal agencies throughout this process. It is really helpful for them to hear from local government. So I encourage people to reach out to their city council, to their mayor, to the county commissioners. Let them know you support this and ask them to weigh in support of the withdrawal as well. It's useful to be communicating to your representatives, so your members of Congress. Let them know that you support this because they have influence over this process because it's a federal process. And it's important to demonstrate support from businesses, so people who own businesses in town, expressing support and asking the businesses that you engage with that you think are care about and are invested in the health of the aquifer. Asking them to submit comments and support is particularly useful. Both in the Yellowstone withdrawal and the Siskiyou, the business community was heavily engaged in wanting to ensure that the drinking aquifer was protected and spoke up quite strongly on its behalf. And then second one is to keep things moving. And I just mentioned that a little bit earlier, but there is a timeline here. And it's it seems 2 years is the segregation period, but it's actually 1 year and 9 months until the end of this administration. And you want to get to a decision before the end of the administration because that is who initiated the withdrawal. So regardless of who the next administration is, things get lost in that transition period because there's a new Secretary of Interior that has to get appointed. There are new staff that have to get, and you need this decision to happen before the end of the 2-year period. So to the extent that you're wanting to get this done, that bird in the hand kind of analogy is a good one here. You want this process to move along, you want it to be streamlined, you want to get to a decision before the end of the administration. Spread the word is an obvious one, but I really encourage people to not only engage in the process yourself, but also let other people know. Write a letter to the editor. Submit an opinion piece to your paper. If you're involved in social media, post information on social media, let people know how they can get engaged and express support publicly in whatever forum you have available to you, and encourage support, as I said, from all of these different sectors, because the federal agencies really respond to that. That's a big part of how they'll ultimately make their decision on the withdrawal. Next slide. And that's a quick and dirty rundown of how the process works and a few examples of where it's been successful. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yeah.
I represent the Withdrawals tribe. I'm the Withdrawals tribe Water Resource Department administrator.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about the 1872 mining act, back when it started the hard rock mining. Not just 4 years after the 1868 treaty, my grandfather was a signer on 6th generation descendant. But back then was the Department of Interior, the War Department.
Oh, that's a good question. His question, if you hadn't heard it, was in 1872 was the Department of Interior the War Department. I actually don't know the answer to that.
When was the Department of Interior created, or when was it established?
Does anyone know when the Department of Interior was created?
I think it was.
Someone Google quickly. What's that?
I thought it was the 1900s.
1900s,
I'm not
yeah. I mean, the 1872 mining law was enacted by Congress at the time. What was it?
1789.
1789 was when Department of Interior was created.
1849.
1849. Yeah, that makes more sense. Not 1789. Yeah. Department of Interior.
Well, I wonder how we fell under the War Department. But anyway, I'm gonna move on. Before NEPA was ever created, what were the regulatory standards for mining?
Well, the 1872 mining law was the law that governs hard rock mining since 1872 when it was enacted. Since then, there have been, the Clean Water Act was put in place, the Endangered Species Act. There are other laws that mining activities have to comply with, but the overarching law is the 1872 mining law, and why it's so important is that it establishes this claim staking process that conveys this right to mine that is so problematic for us because federal agencies feel like they can't deny a mining project regardless of impacts on other resources, and that law is still in effect today. There are a lot of efforts to try and update the 1872 mining law. That has to happen through Congress, and we just simply haven't seen that happen. There are regulations that implement the law, so there's the BLM is the 3809 regulation, the Forest Service has to comply with the 228 regulations. So those give some additional requirements for what mining operations have to meet, but the overarching law is the one that's so problematic because it created this claim staking process.
And my last statement will be, the Treaty of 1851, 1868, we are a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
All this information that's being shared, I wonder why this is never mentioned in our tribal consultations. Why we didn't give them the opportunity for a mineral withdrawal in our sacred black hills.
There should be tribal consultation associated with the NEPA process here, so you absolutely should be getting notice from the federal government about this process and the opportunity to consult. So yes, absolutely, and if you're not, then you should definitely be contacting the BLM and the Forest Service because it's their legal obligation.
You know what, one thing I did recognize, I've been to other consultations with other federal agencies. I know that the Forest Service under the USDA, from our experience, the USDA is not really versed in our treaties and our consultations.
Yeah.
It's a whole separate, because I know that we have issues with water rights and stuff, but,
Yeah.
I think that, the state has a big influence with issuing permits on federal lands, but it's more like a rubber stamp, but I think the Black Hills National Forest needs to really awaken their policies and start doing what you're doing now with this withdrawal. I know that Rapid Creek and Pactola is a good start, but, I know we were at that meeting last week, but, our tribal issues, I know that water quality and watershed protection, but then again, we still have our duties that we have to.
Right, absolutely. And the Biden administration, I want to say in December, but I'm not entirely certain of the month, but they issued a executive order providing stronger direction to all the federal agencies saying that treaty rights have to be considered as part of any federal decision for any of the federal agencies under his authority. So this administration has gone on record as saying that that's a commitment that the agencies are making. But specific to this mineral withdrawal, absolutely, it's their legal obligation to do tribal consultation. And if you're not hearing from them, then that would be something that you definitely would want to communicate. Thanks. Yeah.
You mentioned environmental assessment, but isn't an environmental impact statement preferable to that? And how can we get them to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know if y'all heard it, but the question was, isn't an environmental impact statement better than an environmental assessment? And I know this is counterintuitive, but and I'm always asking for an environmental impact statement when I'm analyzing the impact of a mining project, because you want the most comprehensive review of what the social and environmental impacts of mining are. In this case, you're looking at trying to get protections from mining on federal public lands, and you're trying to get it done within a certain short time period, and you're evaluating the impacts of protecting the land rather than evaluating the impacts of a mining operation. And so when you're evaluating the impacts of protecting the land and you've got a deadline that you're trying to meet, you want that to move as quickly as possible. And so I generally recommend an environmental assessment because you're analyzing what the impacts of protecting that area is on water quality. And you want to get to a FONSI so that you can get the Department of Interior to approve the withdrawal and issue the public land order. So generally, I'm all with you on the EIS for almost everything when you're trying to analyze impacts. But here you're trying to analyze protections, and you want the process to move quickly to get you there. And so, in all of the mineral withdrawal processes that I've been involved in, you know, it always, I was writing comments, it's just so against my nature not to be, you know, going into every little thing. But as a coalition, we all agreed, yes, we want this process to move. We want to get this in place, and an EA will do what we need to get done here, which is just analyzing protections and saying, yeah, that's what we want to accomplish.
Can you explain what a categorical exclusion is?
Yeah, categorical exclusion is when the agencies determine that an activity is so insignificant that they're not going to require a NEPA review. That wouldn't be what they would use here because the CE doesn't, categorical exclusion doesn't apply to mineral withdrawals. They would do an environmental assessment. Yeah.
So I know that the mining companies have assigned a value to their claims. What are the financial ramifications of the withdrawal for them placing a value on those mining claims?
Well, as I said, any claim, there's no effect of a mineral withdrawal on a valid existing claim. So a claim so mineral withdrawals are subject to valid existing rights, which means any claim that can demonstrate validity, there's no effect of the mineral withdrawal on it. So it doesn't affect the value of that claim, because if it's a valid claim, they have every right to move through the mineral exploration and development stage. And there have been efforts to try and claim takings of a mineral withdrawal, and that just simply hasn't been successful.
So if they pay for a unproven claim or a non-valid claim, then it's essentially just a loss to them, and there's no ramifications for them to get compensated for that?
They don't pay much.
Well,
They have.
you have to demonstrate validity, and if the claim isn't valid, then there's no authority for them to hold the claim, regardless if it was a withdrawal or not. A claim has to be valid, which means you have to demonstrate discovery, and that's what gives you the right to mine. And there's a two-part test: the prudent person test, and then the marketability test. And they have to meet those two tests in order to demonstrate validity. And that's described in the record. You can see exactly what those reference, and that's done through a validity exam, so there's a formal process, and that gets triggered when a plan of operation is submitted. Yeah.
So the validity has to be established before this process started?
No. If there's a claim that was pre-existed, the mineral withdrawal, if the company wants to do something on that mining claim, then they'll submit a plan of operation. That will trigger a validity exam at the point when they submit their plan of operation. That's the point when they would have to demonstrate validity, and that determination would be made. So that, it won't occur during this process. It only occurs if they submit a plan of operation to do something on a pre-existing claim. Yeah.
Would that generally mean that they've already done formal exploration in order to be able to prove that?
Generally, it means that they've done some level of exploration. It may not require, because it just requires that there's a surface expression of a deposit, and that there's enough information that a prudent person would move forward with further investment in the process. So typically, mining companies go through much more extensive exploration if they're moving towards development because they need to provide enough information to get, investors and provide for a plan of operation. So the test for a valid claim is less than the level of exploration that you would probably do to, move forward with a mining project. But those are the two tests. That's what they need to pass in order to demonstrate validity. Yeah.
So are claims that are under environmental analysis assessment or environmental impact statement, are those valid claims?
You mean if a mining company has submitted a request for exploration and they're conducting environmental assessment on those claims? Not necessarily. The interesting thing is that we see this all the time where a mining company proposes a plan of, and this is entirely separate from the mineral withdrawal process, but if a mining company submits a plan of operation for exploration, the agencies typically undertake an environmental assessment just based on the assumption that those are all valid claims. They don't require any demonstration of validity at that stage. For typical operations outside of withdrawals, if it was in a withdrawn area, then they would have to demonstrate validity. Outside of a withdrawn area, then that typically isn't required.
What's the duration of the mining claim?
A mining claim they can hold for as long as they want, as long as they pay the claims maintenance fee, which is an annual fee that they pay to hold the claim, and as long as they're demonstrating that they're doing something related to maintaining the claim.
Who reviews that process?
It's the BLM that accepts the fee, the annual fee for each mining claim you pay an annual fee for each claim.
If there's existing valid mining claims, in an area that people want to withdraw, can they withdraw that area if there's a pre-existing valid mining claims in that area?
They can, a lot of mineral withdrawals include areas that have existing claims. It doesn't affect the valid existing claims. There will be no effect on that land, but it would withdraw all of the surrounding federal lands that are within the withdrawal area from new claim staking. So there might be, 10 claims here that were there before the withdrawal. Everything around it that's within the withdrawn boundary that hasn't been claimed would be protected. So no new claim staking on any of those federal public lands. And then there would be limits on the claim because they would have to demonstrate validity to do anything further. So that's the additional step that a mineral withdrawal brings for any. And if they determine that the claim's not valid, then that claim becomes part of, it's federal land, so it becomes part of the withdrawn area. So over time, if they decide, if they either drop the claim, if they're no longer paying for it, it becomes part of the withdrawn area, or if they can't demonstrate validity, that claim would then become part of the withdrawn area, because those are still federal lands. It's just a mining, someone staked a claim on it. It has absolutely no effect on private land. So any private land that is within the withdrawal boundary, no effect on private land or state land. We're only talking about federal land. Yeah.
I'm just curious, I'm glad we're at this point in the process where this has been proposed, but how does it go internally from, boy, there's not a lot we can do because of the 1872 mining law, to we're proposing a withdrawal? What's happening inside the agency that they go, oh boy, we're overwhelmed here, or what's?
The 1872 mining law is what ties the hand of federal land managers when there's a proposed mine. So, you go through exploration, development, you propose a mine. At that stage, if the public says, we really don't want mining in this watershed because we're trying to protect the drinking water aquifer, federal land managers under the 1872 mining law feel like they can't say no to that mine as long as it meets, state and federal regulations. What a mineral withdrawal does is it provides this proactive tool. So if they're saying, if they're hearing from the public that we want the watershed protected from mining activity because we're concerned about the long-term viability of protecting our water, that's the tool that the agency can use to say, okay, then we're going to withdraw the federal lands that, are within this watershed under a mineral withdrawal so that no new claim staking can happen in that area. Because if you've got 33,000 mining claims acres of mining claims being staked since December, that's a lot of activity. And so it's the sort of proactive tool that they can use to withdraw lands from claim staking to protect against mining activity on those lands. Does that answer your question,
I
the
think so.
distinguishment between them?
Well, I know I understand kind of the difference between the two, but it just seems like there's a big gap between, we really can't do anything to, hey, we're proposing this, it's not like we're proposing this on behalf of, there must be, I'm just curious, internally, do they get overwhelmed and they realize, boy, this is a lot of pressure and the public doesn't really want this, so this is our last option, or?
Yeah, I'm guessing that they heard that at those public meetings, there was a lot of consternation about all of this activity and people having a lot of concern. I don't know the details, but I'm guessing there was a lot of concern communicated back channels that led the agency to say, well, let's propose this.
Okay.
We'll see what people say, and we'll take it from there.
Sure.
Yeah, Liz.
I can give a little more specific answer to this particular case. What I've heard back from federal people that I've talked to and other people I know have talked to is that there were three major factors that pushed them towards a withdrawal proposal. One is tribal concerns, two is Ellsworth Air Force Base, and three is general public concerns.
Do you have any, I noticed that it wasn't within the presentation, I know it's been very recent, but do you have any thoughts or comments on the boundary waters, Superior National Forest?
Yeah, and I wasn't involved in that withdrawal because it's not in my region, and so I sort of watched it from afar. It's a little bit different because those were on leases, and so it was a little bit different than the withdrawals in the states that I was involved in. So, yeah, I can't speak to any specifics there. Yeah. Will it protect will it protect the 5 aquifers? Lilius, can you answer that? I don't know what the 5 aquifers are. I know they're proposing 20,000 acres, and it would cover roughly 10% of the Rapid Creek watershed. But Lilius, you want to?
It won't completely protect any aquifers, no.
It won't completely protect any aquifers. So about 10% of the Rapid Creek watershed would be covered, kind of that area right around Pectola Reservoir is what's currently proposed. You could certainly ask them to do more.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask that, have you ever seen a situation where there is a withdrawal that is then, I know they can't add to this one within this process. Have you seen ever where there's a push to have a larger withdrawal after a smaller one is proposed, and that is then proposed after
Well, the mineral withdrawal that I mentioned at the beginning in the Little Rockies, that one's already fairly small, 2,600 acres, but it started out, I want to say 1,900 acres. I've forgotten. They proposed a certain amount of area, and then everyone said, why that? Why aren't you including this area over on this side? And they said, look, we really want to finish this process, but then we'll do, in a second process after that, we'll do the second area. So they did an additional 800 or 900 acres in a second withdrawal process that they initiated shortly after. And then they just did separate reviews so that they could complete one, while they initiated the second one. Relatively small though, we were talking about, 900 acres there compared to so the combination was 2,600. I can't think of any other recent examples. But, they range in size all the way up to the Grand Canyon mineral withdrawal was about 1 million acres, so there are some that are quite considerable in size. Those are more unusual and are a bigger lift to do. So I always recommend, doing the thing that you want to, that does the thing that you want to accomplish. Yeah.
Yeah, so, in their, press release, it says, okay, so 20-year withdrawal, critical watershed on natural forest services land from location entry, appropriation, disposal of the mining laws, and the minerals and geothermal leasing laws, subject to valid existing rights.
Right.
So, some of these companies, take for instance the one that's really mad at us, are they gonna come back, in your experience, say with the Yellowstone and, the Little Rockies and stuff, have you had experiences with the mining companies coming back and saying, we're going to, object, they're the objectors now, but come back to that?
Well, they certainly may oppose the withdrawal, but as I said, the withdrawals are subject to valid existing rights. So their right as claim holder is upheld as long as they can demonstrate validity. So they can certainly oppose the process, but their rights as a claim holder under the 1872 mining law are protected.
So if some of these mining companies did not go through, so some of them have only gone through submitting their plan of operation, and then we object, and it goes back and forth, but some of them haven't really done any exploration at all. So they have not been able to validate it, I guess.
Well, yeah. So what would happen is the land has been segregated under the 2-year segregation period, and then a formal decision about the withdrawal. They submit the plan of operations now because they're in an area that's been withdrawn for the 2 years, and they will have to go through a validity exam for each and every one of those claims before they can do exploration and development on those. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you gave the example of the area where they had one area withdrawn or working on withdrawing, and they added another contiguous area. Did those withdrawal proposals run in sequence, or did they run parallel at the same time?
There was overlap. Let me think. I think there was overlap, if I'm remembering correctly. So they started the initial withdrawal process, partway through it, decided, yes, we'll add the second one, issued a notice for the second one, wrapped up the first one, and then wrapped up the second one. So I think there was a bit of overlap in there, but my memory being what it is, I probably need to double check to say for certain.
So a strategy here might be to keep moving forward with a small area around Actola and ask for a second one to run at the same time parallel to the rest of the area they left off, the rest of the watershed?
It's certainly an option. I'm not gonna, recommend any strategy, but it's certainly an option that's available.
So I had another question. With this mineral withdrawal, they're asking for 20 years, but are all mineral withdrawals for 20 years or are some of them forever?
20 years is the maximum amount that an administrative withdrawal authorizes. So anything that's done through the Department of Interior, the maximum is 20 years. Like I said, it can be renewed at the end of that 20 years, but that's the most that you can do. We've seen 5-year withdrawals done, but the maximum that you can ask for, the maximum that they're authorized to do is 20 years. There are permanent withdrawals, but those are done through Congress. So Congress can, withdraw an area of the mineral withdrawal. And that's what happened at Yellowstone. So they started with an administrative withdrawal, and then the delegation, the Montana delegation, proposed legislation, and they withdrew the area permanently.
So do judges ever order this?
No, judges don't have the authority to. It's only the Secretary of Interior through FEMA or Congress. Or, the President has authority to do national monuments, which would effectively withdraw the land, but, that's a different deal.
So a judge could send it back to the agency for more consideration, but the judge could not order them to actually withdraw.
No, and this is entirely at the discretion of the agency. There's nothing that compels them to do a withdrawal. So there isn't anything you can do to challenge it to say you have to withdraw this area because of X, Y, Z. It's entirely at the discretion of the Secretary of Interior. So it's, you want them to do it, you cannot compel them to do it.
Well, I've seen judges order them to consider mineral
They might require them to reconsider the analysis, but the judge can't compel them to issue a withdrawal.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
To do an analysis, to do the NEPA analysis.
Yeah, the NEPA analysis, if someone challenges that, that's, a challenge under NEPA, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I would think that the Supreme Court decision in the United States versus the Great Sioux Nation, which ruled that all of the Black Hills were unlawfully taken from the tribes that are currently affected by the potential toxic waters from all the mining in the Black Hills, would give the tribes here greater protection than in other areas. And the treaty rights, I think, are greatly enhanced by that Supreme Court ruling, and I believe that we could be using that to our advantage.
Yeah, I mean, treaty rights supersede the 1872 mining law, so, yes.
But this was like a Supreme Court ruling in 1980.
Oh, okay.
And the laws were the whole Black Hills were unlawfully taken from, it was U.S. versus the Great Sioux Nation.
Yeah.
So, it just seems blatantly obvious to me that they're going against the Supreme Court.
Do you want to comment on that?
I'm the attorney that stopped that payment.
What's that?
I said, I am the attorney that stopped the payment on my kid's claim.
Oh, okay.
And so basically, what happened was you had the 1851 Oklahoma Treaty that recognized title of 60 million acres, which included this whole area. Then you have the 1868 Treaty. Well, first of all, you have the Powder River War of 1866 to 68. And that was because Sioux would never have signed that treaty if they thought they were giving up any land. It's all documented in the Claims Commission. So what happened was that we went to the Indian Claims Commission. I'll get back to the history. It had to do with offsets. And so after they found it, determined that the Sioux would not have signed that treaty, if they thought they were relinquishing any land under Article 2 after the Great Sioux Reservation, this area was defined as a reservation. And somebody snuck in language, either the commissioners or the Civil War generals, and they put in that the Sioux relinquished all the territory outside the Great Sioux Reservation, 34 million acres. And then they also grabbed 14 million acres east of the river, it's now treaty land, 40 million acres. It's fraudulently grabbed by the United States under Article 2 of the 68 Treaty. And so that's why we reject it. We're not going to perpetuate fraud on our own people. So we're rejecting money on that from the 68 Treaty. But getting back to Black Hills, what happened was that this was a reservation here. And in 1868, and then 1882, we used to call it the Mineral Location Act, 1872. Now it's called the Mining Act, I guess. So under the Mineral Location Act, there's a lot of trespassing miners came into our reservation here in the Black Hills and started mining gold. Hearst and other people started locating mines in Black Hills. So that was let me just kind of back. General Custer came in here in 1874 with a military expedition and sent out glowing reports of gold. So the result was a gold rush. And all these people came in, they were all trespassers. In 1874 to 1877, there was a crime in trespassing Indian land. So all these people came in with criminal trespassers in 1874 to 1877. And Congress attempted to purchase the land from the Sioux Indians, but they couldn't get the requisite 3/4 signatures required under Article 12 of the 68 Treaty. So what happened was that Congress in 1877 confiscated it. They came in and just enacted a proposed redistricting law. So that became the 1877 Act. That 1877 Act has provisions in it that in consideration for all the territory being confiscated in the hunting rights, the U.S. would provide all aid necessary for civilization. So this idea that Indians get free checks, from the government is totally false. They took 40 million acres of land, and these checks are in consideration for that confiscation. It's right in Article 5 of the Hills Act. Article 8 says that each of the Indians will be subject to the laws of the United States. In the Prodell case, the U.S. Supreme Court said that was a trust responsibility laws, only laws of the United States. And then Article 8 says each individual civilian will be protected his rights of personal property and life. You would think that it would be water, clean water, and clean environment. But anyway, there's a lot of illegal mining prior to 1877. And so there was a court case that went to Supreme Court in Catalonia, mining company case. Several years after 1877, there was a dispute on these mining claims. The U.S. Supreme Court in the Catalonia case said that all the illegal mining that took place prior to the 1877 Black Hills Act was legalized by the Black Hills Act of 1877. So all the mining claims out of the 72 Mineral Location Act became valid claims. And subsequent to that, but still it's probably a violation of the treaty of Article 12. We never give three-fourths consent to all this. So what happened was that when the Black Hills case was decided by the Indian Claims Commission in 1974, the Sioux were awarded $102 million for Black Hills, $17.1 million in interest, principal, and $85 million in interest, since it was a unconstitutional taking of the land. Then it came to $105 million because there's 3 right-of-ways across the Sioux Nation that's compensated said that since the President Grant and others allowed these trespassing minors to come in, that constituted a taking of that placer loan, surface loan.
Mhm.
And therefore, they awarded the city is $150,000 for the placer loan, but nothing for the hard rock loan that we mined.
Yeah.
Negative for that.
Huh.
So that there, what happened was, then, 1974, after the Indian Claims Commission rendered that decision, and went to the court of claims and dismissed. So there's no Blackfield's case in court in 1974. So the lawyers, not the tribal lawyers, the claims lawyers in the back, Congress, that was 78 Act, asked to litigate the Blackfield's claim. He noble, and the new case. And so it was refiled in 1978, and then Court of Claims basically took the record of the Indian Claims Commission and this loan and awarded $102 million to Blackfield's, $3 million for 3 right-of-ways, and $450,000 for placer pay. So when that decision came down, the government appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court. June 30th, 1980, the Supreme Court affirmed that this language you're talking about. So then we had to make a decision real fast. We allowed the claim to the money to be paid out. We would lose our claim to the Blackfields. So my tribe, the Wellesley tribe, authorized me to file a lawsuit in federal court. And I went into federal court and argued that we were not a party to the 1980 decision. Because the claims attorneys did not have a contract. Never came to us by the permission we filed in the 78 Act. And therefore we were free to sue for quiet title. So we filed a quiet title action with this forgery report, originally before Judge Vogt, on July 18th, before the money was paid out. The money was paid out on July 23rd, 20 days later to all the tribes, and then the government claimed that they were all paid. But we took the position that we were not parties to that case, we were never paid, and so I recused all the federal judges. I don't know if you remember all this. South Dakota is transferred to Judge Schatz in Omaha, Nebraska. I had to go down and argue it, got an injunction, basically maintain status quo all the way to Supreme Court. In the interim period, the government lost the ability to distribute that award because they had only 1 year to do it, and we were in court for 1 year. So that's why that money's still sitting, because we stopped that payment. And we kept it in court all the way to Supreme Court. And so the sister, on interest, probably with the other sister claim, probably over $2 million decision, but we're rejecting it. So that's kind of where the thing stands. And there's a sister claim on 48 million acres, and we contested that also, and we stopped the payment on that. So we're not going to perpetuate the government's fraud on people through that 1868 treaty. And relinquish the money. And that's what the main thing we're rejecting. And at some point, there has to be a settlement here. Now, they keep issuing mining claims under the 72 Mineral Location Act. But some of these, I think Homestake pretty much exhausted. There's still a lot of leads on these other ones. And they keep issuing those now. There's a question, I think, that you mentioned Secretary of Interior has discretion.
Yes.
Withdrawals. Well, I think it's really the president. The president can write that. Lithium mine in northern Nevada, they need lithium for these electric cars. So the native people over there, I think what are they,
Yeah.
they want to close down that lithium mine. But they were overridden, but I think the president's fine because he is wanting his lithium mine to be open for electric cars. I think there's even lithium in this.
Well, the Secretary of Interior works for the president, so, and it's generally a bit of a political decision because it's at the discretion, so yeah, the administration could certainly influence the secretary's decision. Yeah.
The secretary has discretion.
Yeah. Yeah, only meaning that there isn't a legal requirement that compels her, but that's really useful and interesting background information.
Another thing is that, we're very concerned about this categorical exclusion requirement.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done any cultural surveys in any of these projects.
Yeah.
It's Commerce County and Wyoming, we follow protests there on that one. We didn't know that, we're against it. I think a rod was issued, and was rescinded. We haven't filed a lawsuit.
Yeah.
We know the cultural survey was done from there, and the cultural survey was done, people did cultural surveys in reviewed and asked for it. And I don't think there's any cultural surveys done in any of these smaller management surveys.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think their public scope would be mounted anything. When I went to the one in Custer, public scope it is required under NEPA. I went to the one in Custer, just a venting session. The Forest Service wasn't even avoiding any of their comments.
Mm.
It was just a waste of time. That's what they do.
Mario, we recorded those conversations, we submitted them as public comments, is that
No,
really?
the official record was not recorded by the Forest Service, because she worked for the Forest Service.
No, we submitted it, all as a public comment, the entire transcript of the entire meeting. So
That's good,
we
so
did
it's on
actually-
record, yeah. Yeah, thank you. No, I'm glad you did, because this isn't, I'm based in Montana, so I don't know all that history. That's good to hear. Any other questions? Yeah.
What are the parameters or the acreage or footage or whatever that are involved with a mining claim? What are they?
They're typically 20 acres.
20 acres?
Yeah, a load claim is 20 acres, a mill site claim is 5 acres. So a load claim is the claim that's used for, underground or open pit mining, hard rock. Mill site claim, it's 5 acres, that's used for where the mill is located and other sort of infrastructure. But yeah, they're typically, when you see on a map, you see sort of a little parallelogram square, and those are mining claims. That's what they look like, kind of that long, yeah.
So all that purple you showed on that one slide are 20 acres, right?
Yeah, individual 20-acre claims, just, yeah.
And did you say there were 30,000 new claims in the Black Hills since December of 22?
33,000 acres.
30,000 acres.
Yeah, that information was collected by Lilia, so I credit her with the with the information.
It's like an uphill battle.
So divide that by 20, and then you would know how many new claims. I mean, I'm presuming there. You can have a load claim. You can also have a placer claim. Placer claims are for those that where they're next to water bodies and where they're going to use placer operations. But those are also 20 acres. So placer and load claims are both.
You know how much they have to pay annually for their claim? Say they got 20.
I should know that. It's less than $200.
$25 if they do the work, $125 if they don't.
So they do maintenance.
Yeah, and then there's a fee they pay the first year, and then they pay an annual fee after that. So the first year they pay a little bit more, and then annually after that it's to, with claims maintenance, or if you're actually doing work on the site, it's a
So they
less.
can be waived $100 if they do some maintenance on it, say they clean up some trees or
I mean, the outrageous thing under the 1872 mining law is that it used to allow mining claims to be patented for, the price of a hamburger. I mean, it was $5 an acre. When Congress has precluded every year, it's a rider on a bill that gets passed, and it precludes patenting anymore, so you can no longer privatize one of those claims. But historically, up until not that long ago, really, they used to be able to, once you filed a claim and did all of that, you could go through the patenting process in order to buy that claim, and then and then it was essentially private property. So all of those patented claims out there were acquired under the 1872 mining law. So it still sort of authorizes it, it's just that Congress every year passes legislation that says, you know, you can't do that any longer. And as long as they continue to approve that every year, that's precluded. But, yeah. Yeah, these are for hard rock mining claims, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, like I said, patenting is no longer authorized. I want to say since 1995, it's been annually precluded, but before
Yeah,
that.
I would get like, say they get the maintenance 25 for this 20 acres, and then a rancher has cattle on that, so the Forest Service would get leasing costs on top of that. So basically, if they're leasing that land for cattle, which they do.
They might, I'm not aware of that, but it's certainly possible that, you know, that's a good question, whether they could lease for cattle on top of a mining claim. You know for a fact if that's happened?
I don't know for a fact, but I know that there's cattle on Forest Service land.
Yeah, I mean,
And it's like
Yeah.
$13 an acre, used to be like $5 an acre, you know, now it's like 13.
yeah, okay, we're wrapping up. One more question. What have you got?
So our work is to try to figure out how to say everything that everybody said.
Yeah.
That is a good case for why closing down mining for 20 years would be a good thing.
Yes.
All the benefits with it, from cultural to
Protecting water, protecting all of your drinking water aquifer, your everything that you care about in that area. Right.
and getting as many different entities, business
To
and
say that.
renters and
Yeah. That is
Five.
that's it in a nutshell.
everybody, and do that quickly.
Bingo.
Get the letters in, really well written before June 20th.
Yeah, that's your first opportunity. That's that 90-day comment period. You know, then everybody has another chance to comment when the draft EA comes out, and that'll be part of the administrative record too. So, you know, anything you can't get done this time, and I encourage you to, you know, put a lot of support there. But you can always be adding more support in during the draft EA stage too, because that'll be part of the administrative record as well. But yes, perfect way to wrap things up. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks again for showing up, and thanks to Bonnie for coming to us from Missoula. In front of you are some cards that say what's next. If you read that, it will take you to the link to submit your comments. And piggybacking off of what you just were asking and saying, we have until June 20th to get as many comments as we can. So talk to your friends who are owners of small businesses, large businesses. Contact people who are not just in city government right now, but who are running for city government right now, and urge them to submit their comments. Thank you again for your questions and your inputs. And thanks again to Bonnie.
Hey everybody, Taylor Gunhammer from NDN Collective here. We just wanted to stream this presentation about this mineral withdrawal, since that is what we're dealing with here in the Black Hills right now. And Bonnie Gestring is a very knowledgeable person about that. So we will be figuring out how to make this available to you so we all can learn it. Thanks for tuning in with us.